The year was 1872, and I was a poor man, poorer than most, though pride wouldn't let me admit it. Pride had kept me standing long after I should have fallen. The rains had failed us that spring, and by summer half my herd lay dead in the dust, ribs showing through their hides like bones pressed against paper. The other half wandered thin and restless, looking at me with the same question in their eyes I asked of God every night. How long could we keep going? I had nothing left but my land, 60 scrub acres fenced with wire I'd borrowed money to buy, a barn half fallen to termites, and a house that looked bigger on the outside than it felt inside. Loneliness has a way of shrinking walls. Every night, I walked those creaking boards alone, listening to coyotes sing their sharp, mocking songs out in the dark. A man can endure hunger, heat, and debt, but silence, night after night, will unman him quicker than any gun. It was in that state, pride cracked, pockets empty, spirit near breaking, that I made the bargain people still whisper about in saloons from Abilene clear down to El Paso. I took a wife for a cow. I didn't set out to do it. Lord knows I never dreamed of such a thing. But desperation breeds strange harvests. I had come into town with the last steer worth trading, thinking to buy grain before winter set in. I'd tied the animal outside the trading post, its hide patchy, its ribs sharp, yet it was still worth more alive than most of what I owned. I stood inside at the counter, bartering harder than dignity should allow, when a voice behind me said, calm as still water, I'll give him more than grain for that cow. I'll give him a wife. The room went quiet. Boots scuffed against the floor, chairs scraped back, men turned to stare. I turned too, and there she was straight-backed, veiled in dust from the trail, her dress plain as homespun, her eyes the color of storm clouds. She couldn't have been more than 30, though there was a weariness in her that made her seem older. The man beside her, a trader I'd seen passing through before, grinned like he'd set a trap, and I'd stepped right in. She's looking for a husband. You're looking for more than grain. Fair trade, don't you think? The laughter that followed cut sharper than a knife. I burned under it, but I didn't walk away. Pride held me still, and pride, twisted as it was, is what made me nod. The ceremony happened the very next day. A preacher was fetched, the kind who'd marry a horse to a wagon for the right coin. Clara, that was her name, stood beside me without a tremor. She spoke her vows in a voice steady and low, while I stumbled through mine like a schoolboy. There were no flowers, no family, no friends, just dust in the air, heat on our necks, and the sound of men outside chuckling that a man had traded a cow for a wife. I told myself it didn't matter. A wife was company. A wife was help with the house, with the chores, maybe even children, if she allowed it. I convinced myself it was a step toward rebuilding, not a mark of shame. But when we rode back to the ranch, silence hung between us heavier than any sack of grain I'd ever hold. That first evening, I tried to be gentle. I showed her the house, the barn, the little stream that cut through the back field. She walked with her hands folded before her, eyes taking in everything yet giving nothing back. At supper she barely ate. I asked about her past, where she'd come from, what had led her to such a bargain. She answered with silence, the kind that makes a man feel like a trespasser in his own home. When night came, I lit the lamp and tried to soften my voice. Clara, I said, the room's upstairs. We can... She turned, her face pale, in the lamplight, and said in a voice that left no room for argument, you'll sleep down here. Then she walked upstairs, closed the door, and turned the key. The lock clicked like a gun cocking. I lay awake on the hard sofa, staring at the ceiling. I told myself it was nerves, that in time she'd soften. But night after night, it was the same. She cooked, she cleaned, she moved through the house like a ghost, and when dusk fell, the door upstairs shut against me. I won't lie, anger grew in me. A man can suffer poverty, but rejection in his own house gnaws at his soul. Some nights, I stood at the bottom of the stairs, hand clenched, half tempted to break that lock with my boot. But I didn't. Something in her eyes, some old pain I couldn't name, held me back. The days blurred with work. I mended fences, tried to nurse the cattle back to strength, rode miles in search of grass that wasn't there. Sometimes I'd see her at the window watching me, her face unreadable. Once, when I staggered in from the fields with a bloodied hand, she rushed forward, took it in her own, and bound it with cloth before stepping back into silence. That small mercy lit a spark of hope in me. But just as quickly, the cold returned. She barred herself in every night, and I remained in exile in my own marriage. It was the storm that changed everything. A black sky rolled in from the west, thunder cracking like cannon fire, rain slashing the earth until the yard turned to a mire. I was patching the roof when lightning split the sky, close enough to throw me to my knees. I crawled inside, soaked to the bone, and heard something that stopped me cold. Crying. It was faint at first, muffled through the wood, but no storm could drown it out. It came from upstairs, from behind that locked door. A sound raw and broken, like someone who'd held back tears so long they'd forgotten how to weep. I climbed the stairs slowly, my boots leaving wet prints. I laid a hand on the door. "Clara?" I whispered. Her sobs quieted. Then came a single word, strangled and desperate. A name. Not mine. I stepped back as if struck. The storm raged outside, but all I heard was the echo of that name, spoken with such yearning it hollowed me out. I realized in that moment I knew nothing of the woman I had married, nothing of the ghosts that walked with her, nothing of the chains that bound her heart. I had taken her into my house, but her soul was far away, locked behind a door I had no key to. And as I stood there, thunder shaking the rafters, I felt a cold truth settle in my bones. This bargain I had made was not the end of loneliness. It was only the beginning. The storm passed, but its echo lingered in the house. After that night, Clara moved about with a kind of restless watchfulness, as if every sound from the road was meant for her ears alone. I asked nothing of her, for I'd learned questions were like stones tossed at a wounded animal. They only made her flinch deeper into herself. But I carried the sound of her weeping and the name she whispered heavy in my chest. It was a week later when the first stranger came. I was mending a section of fence at the edge of my land, the sun dropping low, and the air thick with the hum of cicadas. I heard the jangle of tack and looked up to see a rider approaching from the west. He was a tall man with a scar splitting his chin and a rifle slung loose across his saddle. His horse was lathered, as though it had come a long, hard way. "Afternoon," he said, reining up just beyond the fence. His voice was smooth, too smooth, like a knife-edge polish thin. I nodded, wary. Strangers didn't ride that far without a purpose. "Afternoon. Name's Braddock. I'm looking for someone. A woman about yet tall." He raised a hand. Dark hair, strong eyes. Might go by Clara. My throat tightened, though my face I kept a stone. "Ain't seen her," I lied. He studied me with eyes that knew lies when they heard them. "Funny thing. Folks in town said you took yourself a bride. Traded a cow for her, no less. Now, I don't judge a man for the bargains he makes, but it'd be a shame if you married someone that wasn't yours to take." I felt my hand drift toward the hammer of my Colt, though it rested quiet in the holster. "You've had your say. Time to move on." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "If she's here, she'll come to me soon enough. Tell her Braddock stopped by." With that he turned his horse and rode back into the setting sun, leaving me with dust in my teeth and a fire rising in my blood. That night I found Clara by the hearth, hands clenched tight around her apron. She had heard his voice from inside, of that I was certain. "You know him," I said. She turned away. "Eat your supper, Daniel." I crossed the room, anger boiling. "Don't treat me like a fool." "Who is he?" Her shoulders shook, though she held her silence until it broke with a whisper. "He's part of what I ran from." She would say no more, and I, half mad with frustration, slammed my fist against the table so hard the lamp flickered. Her eyes flashed with fear, and in that moment I hated myself more than I hated her silence. The days that followed were worse. I rode the range sleepless, half expecting Braddock to return with others. I checked the barn at night, rifle in hand, listening for the sound of hooves in the dark. And always Clara's distance gnawed at me, her footsteps light, as a shadow, her gaze darting to the window with every gust of wind. It was near dusk when the trouble came for real. I had just driven a half-dead steer into the corral when I saw tracks in the dirt by the barn, fresh, many of them too heavy for deer. My gut told me what my eyes didn't want to see. Someone had been watching us. That night the herd broke. I woke to the bellow of cattle and the pounding of hooves. Bursting from the house with rifle in hand, I saw shapes cutting through the dark, riders half a dozen or more, driving off what little life remained of my stock. I fired, the crack splitting the night, and heard a cry as one man fell from his horse. But the rest thundered on, dust rising even under the moonlight, until they vanished with everything I had left. I gave chase, bareback on my sorrel, the rifle balanced across my arm. The night wind tore at my face, the world nothing but hooves, shadows, and the red haze of fury. Shots cracked back at me. I felt one whistle pass my ear, another tear through my sleeve. I fired blindly, the recoil jolting through me, until pain seared my side and I toppled from the saddle, the earth slamming me hard enough to steal my breath. When I came to, it was dawn. The herd was gone, and blood soaked my shirt where a bullet had grazed me. I stumbled home, half dreaming, half dead, to find Clara waiting at the gate. For the first time, she ran to me. Her hands pressed against the wound, her eyes fierce with something between fear and care. "Fool," she hissed, "you'll bleed yourself out." I staggered inside, and she set to work with strips of cloth and boiling water. She didn't speak as she cleaned the wound, but her hands shook, betraying more than her lips ever would. When at last I was bound and half lying on the bed, she sat beside me, her face pale. "They won't stop," she said finally. "They'll come again. They're not after cattle. They're after me." Her voice carried the weight of years unspoken, and I lay silent, waiting. She looked into the fire as if it showed her another world. "My husband," she began, and the words cut me deeper than the bullet. "His name was Seth. He ran with men like Braddock. Thieves. Killers. I was nothing but a girl when he took me. I tried to escape once, but he found me. Beat me near to death. Then the war came, and word reached me he'd been killed in Missouri. I thought I was free. I wandered west, searching for a place he'd never touched. That's when I traded myself into your life. I thought a marriage might hide me. Thought no one would look for a wife on a ranch no one cared about." Her eyes brimmed, but no tears fell. "But Seth isn't dead. Or, if he is, his men live on. And they'll never let me go." I lay there, the truth cutting me open. She hadn't barred the door because of me. She barred it because of him. Every night she kept herself locked away, fighting battles in her head I couldn't see. Anger burned through me, not at her, but at the men who hunted her, at the fate that tied us together with blood and fear. I wanted to tell her she was safe, but my words tasted like lies. We both knew one rancher with a failing herd was no shield against a gang of killers. The very next night, we heard it, a rifle shot in the distance, then another. Not at us, but close enough to make the windows shudder. A warning. I stepped onto the porch with my rifle, Clara, at my side. In the moonlight, I saw riders cresting the ridge, their silhouettes black against the silver sky. One voice carried down, cruel and mocking, "We'll be back at dawn. Send her out, and maybe we'll let the place stand." Then they were gone, leaving the silence heavier than before. Clara stood beside me, her face lit pale by the moon. Her hands trembled, but her jaw was set. "They'll kill you if you stand with me," she whispered. I gripped the rifle tighter. "Then they'll have to try." She looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time since the day we wed. And in her gaze I saw a flicker of something new. Not love, not yet, but the faint glimmer of trust born of desperation. We didn't sleep that night. I boarded windows, checked the rifles, set what traps I could. She moved with me, carrying lanterns, fetching nails, her silence no longer cold but grimly determined. In the stillness before dawn, she sat across from me at the table, the rifle lying between us. "They'll come," she said. I nodded. "Let them." And as the first light touched the land, I saw the dust rise from the ridge again, darker, heavier this time. More riders, Braddock among them, and others I didn't recognize. Their horses snorted, their rifles gleamed, and their laughter carried across the field. Clara's hand hovered near the rifle. Her eyes met mine, wide and uncertain, but behind them a storm gathered. For the first time, she did not run to the stairs, did not bar herself away. She stood beside me on the porch, facing the dawn and the men it brought. The riders slowed, fanning out in a half circle, rifles raised. Braddock tipped his hat, smiling that thin smile. "Morning, rancher. You've got something that belongs to us." I felt Clara stiffen, but she didn't falter. Her hand closed around the rifle, knuckles white, breath sharp. For the first time since I'd known her, Clara spoke not to me, but to them. Her voice was steady as stone. "I don't belong to you." The riders laughed, but my heart hammered like a war drum. The air was heavy with dust, with fear, with something fierce and unspoken between us. The sun broke the horizon, spilling light over the barrels of their rifles, over Clara's face, over my trembling hands. That was how the siege began. The sun climbed slow that morning, dragging the shadows across the yard like chains. My rifle felt heavy in my hands, heavier still with the weight of what stood beside me. Clara, this woman who had locked her heart away behind doors and silence, now stood shoulder to shoulder with me on the porch. Her face was pale, her jaw tight, but her eyes burned with something I had not seen before, defiance. Braddock sat his horse at the center of the half-circle, his grin cutting through the dawn. "Now, this can be easy, rancher. Send her out, and we'll leave the place standing. Don't, and we'll burn it down with the both of you inside." I raised my rifle, the barrel catching alight. "If you want her, you'll have to step through me." The men laughed, cruel and certain. They had numbers on their side, and confidence bred from 100 bloody raids. Yet none of them moved forward. Perhaps it was the way Clara leveled her rifle beside mine, her hands trembling but steadying as she took aim. "First one who rides closer dies," I called. The standoff stretched, the silence louder than any gunshot. Then Braddock's grin hardened, and he spat into the dust. "So be it." The first shot cracked from their side. It splintered the post behind my head, showering us with wood. Clara flinched, but she didn't break. Together we fired back, my rifle roaring, hers flashing with fire. One rider toppled from his saddle, his horse screaming as it bolted through the circle. That broke the line. They came in fast, whooping and firing, the yard exploding with chaos. Bullets tore through the walls, glass shattered, smoke filled the air. I dragged Clara inside, and we crouched behind the table as slugs thudded into the wood. "Reload," I barked, shoving cartridges into her shaking hands. She fumbled once, then steadied, sliding rounds into the rifle with grim determination. When she raised it again, her face was pale, but set with steel. We fired through the windows, ducked as bullets hissed past, fired again. 2 more fell, their bodies thrashing in the dust. But the gang was relentless, circling the house, whooping like devils. Smoke from their torches began to creep through the cracks. Already they meant to burn us out. The heat of it pressed against my skin, and sweat dripped into my eyes. My side throbbed where the old wound pulled at me, blood seeping through the bandage Clara had tied. But there was no time for weakness. "Not now." Upstairs, I shouted. "We'll have a better angle." We stumbled up the narrow stairs, firing from the windows at riders who circled below. Clara's hair had come loose, falling wild around her face, but she fought like someone possessed. Each shot she took was a choice, a defiance of the man and the past that hunted her. One outlaw hurled a torch, flames licking at the porch roof. I leaned out, shot him square, and watched him tumble backward into the dust. Another tried the barn, but Clara dropped him before he struck a match. The battle stretched on, minutes that felt like hours. Gunpowder choked the air, and the house groaned with the strain of fire and bullets. My shoulder burned from the recoil, my throat raw from shouting. Yet through it all, Clara stood beside me, every shot driving another nail into the coffin of her fear. Then came the voice I dreaded most. "Clara." It rang out clear and booming, silencing even the gunfire. "Clara, it's me." Braddock's riders parted, and a man stepped forward. His face was older, scarred by years and sin, But Clara's gasp told me what words could not. Seth, her husband, alive. He carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had owned everything he ever touched. His coat was fine, his revolver silver-plated, his eyes cold as iron. He spread his arms wide as though welcoming her home. You thought you could run, didn't you? His voice was cruel music. Thought death could part us? No, Clara. You're mine. Always were, always will be. Clara stood frozen, her rifle shaking in her hands. I saw her lips move, but no words came. I raised my rifle, sighting down at his chest, but his voice cut through me before I could fire. Kill me, rancher, and my men will string you up before the sun sets. But let her come, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to regret it. Clara's breath came ragged, her body trembling. For a heartbeat, I feared she would falter, that the chains of the past would drag her back. But then her eyes hardened, and her voice rose clear above the chaos. I am not yours. She raised her rifle and fired. The shot struck his shoulder, spinning him sideways. Chaos erupted. The riders roared, guns blazing, but I fired beside her, cutting down the man near Seth. Clara reloaded, hands swift, eyes fierce. Seth staggered, clutching his wound, but he did not fall. Rage twisted his face as he bellowed, "Burn it all! Burn them both!" His men surged forward, torches flaring, gunfire tearing into the house. Flames caught the porch, climbed the walls, smoke filling the rooms like a rising tide. We stumbled back down the stairs, choking, coughing, firing blind through the haze. I felt the floorboards tremble beneath us, the heat of the blaze licking at our heels. Clara grabbed my arm, eyes wide. We can't stay. But there was nowhere to run. They had us surrounded, fire before us, bullets behind. In that moment, something inside me settled. If this was to be our end, then it would be side by side. I turned to Clara, saw the soot streaked across her face, the fire in her eyes, and felt a strange peace. Together, I said. Together, she echoed. We burst from the front door in a storm of fire and smoke. Bullets whined past, torches swung, men shouted. I fired until the rifle clicked empty, then drew my Colt, the barrel glowing with heat. Clara fired beside me. Each shot true, each cry of a falling man a victory against the chains that had bound her. And then Seth was there, looming through the smoke, revolver raised. "Clara!" he roared, his voice raw with fury. "You crawl back to me, or die here." Time slowed. I saw her face, saw the years of fear and silence carved into it, saw them burn away in the firelight. She raised her rifle, her hands steady, her eyes unflinching. "No more," she said. The shot rang out. Seth's body jerked, his revolver firing wild into the sky, before he crumpled into the dust. The sight of their leader falling broke the gang. Panic swept them, and they scattered, riding hard into the dawn, leaving their dead and dying in the dirt. The smoke thinned, the gunfire faded, and at last silence fell over the ruined ranch. I stood trembling, my Colt hanging limp my side, breath ragged. Clara lowered her rifle, her whole body shaking. For a moment, she simply stared at Seth's body, as if waiting for him to rise again. When he didn't, she let out a breath that seemed to carry years of sorrow with it. The fire crackled low around us, embers glowing in the wreck of the porch. The ranch still stood, though scarred and blackened. My herd was gone, my fences broken, my fields ruined. Yet for the first time in years, I did not feel alone. Clara turned to me. Her eyes met mine, not with distance, not with silence, but with something raw and real. She reached for my hand, hesitant at first, then firm. That night, she did not lock the door. I lay awake beside her, listening to the soft sound of her breathing, and thought of all that had brought us to this moment. The bargain, the silence, the storm, the fire. I thought of a name she had whispered in her sleep, a ghost that would haunt her no more. In the years since, I've often wondered at the meaning of it all. Was it fate that brought her to me, or simply the desperate bargain of a poor man and a haunted woman? I don't pretend to know, but I do know this. The frontier tested more than muscle and grit. It tested hearts, and only the strongest survived. Clara was stronger than she ever knew. And maybe in standing beside her, I became stronger too. So, when folks in town laugh about the rancher who traded a cow for a wife, I let them laugh. They don't know the fire, the blood, the truth of what was forged here. They don't know that the locked door was never meant to keep me out, but to keep her past from breaking in. And they'll never know the night she opened it, not just the door, but herself, and let me in.